In the depths of space, where ancient civilizations crumble and new empires rise, there exists a truth that would shatter the foundations of everything we believe about heroes and legends. For decades, the peaceful world of Zelthara had been protected by a mysterious guardian who appeared whenever darkness threatened their existence. The people called him the Shadow Protector, a figure of myth and wonder who vanished as quickly as he came, leaving only whispered tales of impossible victories against overwhelming odds. But what happens when the impossible becomes personal? When the hero of legends turns out to be someone you once knew, someone you laughed with, someone you thought you had lost forever? This is the story of Captain Lyra Voss, a decorated officer of the Zeltharan Defense Force, who discovered that sometimes the greatest mysteries hide in plain sight, and sometimes the most extraordinary people come from the most ordinary beginnings. It's a story about friendship that transcends time and space, about sacrifice that goes unrecognized, and about the moment when everything you thought you knew about your world gets turned upside down. Prepare yourself for a journey that will take you from the quiet streets of a small town to the vast battlefields of space, where one human's dedication to protecting those he cares about rewrites the very definition of what it means to be a hero. The first time Captain Lyra Voss saw the Shadow Protector in action, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The massive Korthak battleship hung in Zelthara's atmosphere like a dark omen, its weapons charging for what would surely be the final blow against her world's inadequate defenses. The planetary shields had failed 3 hours ago, and the evacuation ships were still loading civilians from the major cities. Lyra gripped the command console of her fighter squadron's flagship, watching helplessly as death approached her homeworld. Her pilots were brave, but their small craft were nothing against a dreadnought that could glass entire continents. The Zeltharan Defense Force had sent every available ship, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough when the Korthak Dominion decided they wanted a world. Then, something impossible happened. A single small ship, no larger than a personal transport, emerged from the asteroid belt beyond Zelthara's moons. It moved with a grace that defied physics, weaving between the Korthak fighter swarms like they were standing still. Lyra's sensors couldn't get a clear reading on it. The ship seemed to bend light around itself, appearing solid one moment and translucent the next. "Commander, are you seeing this?" her weapons officer, Lieutenant Torres, whispered into the calm before Lyra could respond. The mysterious ship struck. Not with conventional weapons, but with something that made the Korthak vessels simply stop working. One by one, the enemy fighters began shutting down, their pilots ejecting in escape pods as their ships went dead in space. The massive battleship's weapons powered down, its engines sputtering to a halt. The unknown vessel approached the dreadnought's command section with impossible precision. Through her scope, Lyra watched as a single figure in what looked like modified human combat armor somehow passed through the ship's hull like it wasn't there. Minutes later, the entire Korthak fleet began retreating, broadcasting surrender codes in a dozen languages. The mysterious ship vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only confused Zeltharan forces and a lot of very bewildered Korthak prisoners who couldn't explain why they had suddenly decided to abandon their invasion. This was 3 years ago, and it had been happening ever since. Whenever Zelthara faced a threat too great for its own defenses, the Shadow Protector appeared. Pirates, slavers, even the occasional rogue AI collective, all met the same fate. They would arrive with overwhelming force, encounter the mysterious guardian, and either flee or surrender without explanation. The Zeltharan government had tried everything to identify their protector. They'd launched investigations, offered rewards, even attempted to track the ship's energy signature. Nothing worked. The Shadow Protector remained a ghost, helping when needed and disappearing without a trace. Lyra had been promoted twice since that first encounter, largely because of her tactical thinking during the various crisis situations where the Guardian appeared. She'd learned to coordinate her forces to support the mysterious figure's efforts, even though she never knew what form that support would take until the moment arrived. Standing now in the briefing room of the Defense Force headquarters on Zelthara Prime, she listened to Admiral Kane explain the latest threat. The Void Reapers, a nomadic fleet that consumed entire star systems for resources, had set their sights on the Zelthara sector. Intelligence suggested they would arrive within the week with a force large enough to overwhelm every defensive installation in the system. "This time might be different," Admiral Kane said, his weathered face grim. "The Void Reapers don't just conquer worlds, they strip them down to the molecular level. Even if our Guardian shows up, I'm not sure one person, no matter how capable, can stop an entire harvest fleet." After the briefing, Lyra found herself alone in her office, staring at the holographic display that showed the approaching threat. Thousands of ships, each one designed for systematic planetary destruction. The mathematical certainty of Zelthara's doom stared back at her from the tactical projections. She pulled up the classified files she'd been accumulating over the past 3 years. Every report, every sensor reading, every witness account of the Shadow Protector's interventions. Somewhere in this data had to be a clue about who their guardian really was. Not because she doubted their ability, quite the opposite. She wanted to help them, to finally offer something more than just cleanup duty after the real hero had saved the day. One file caught her attention. A sensor anomaly from the first Korthok incident that had been dismissed as equipment malfunction. The energy signature had briefly resembled something familiar, but the computer had flagged it as impossible and filed it under unknown phenomena. Lyra enhanced the reading, running it through new analysis protocols that hadn't existed 3 years ago. The result made her hands tremble. The energy pattern wasn't alien at all. It was human technology, but advanced far beyond anything she'd ever seen. More specifically, it matched theoretical designs she remembered from her childhood, from science projects and dreams of exploration that belonged to someone she'd lost long ago. Thomas Chen had been her best friend growing up in New Harbor, Zelthara's agricultural sector. While other kids played games, Tommy had been obsessed with spacecraft design and theoretical physics. He'd shown her blueprint after blueprint of impossible ships that could phase through matter, weapons that could disable enemy systems without destruction, and shields that bent space around them. She'd laughed at his wild imagination then. Everyone had. Tommy was brilliant but impractical, the kind of kid who got picked last for sports but could calculate hyperspace trajectories in his head. When the transport accident took him and his family during their move to the research colonies, Lyra had mourned not just her friend, but all those impossible dreams that would never be built. Now, staring at sensor readings that matched designs from a dead boy's sketchbook, she felt the universe tilt around her. The next morning brought worse news. The Void Reaper advanced scouts had been detected at the system's edge, and they were moving faster than projected. The main fleet would arrive in 3 days, not 7. The evacuation efforts were hopelessly behind schedule, and there was no guarantee that fleeing ships wouldn't be hunted down anyway. Lyra made a decision that went against every protocol in her training. She took a small, fast courier ship and flew to the coordinates where the Shadow Protector's vessel had last been detected. It was a long shot, but the energy trails might lead her to wherever the mysterious Guardian operated from. The search took her to an asteroid cluster in the outer system, where her sensors picked up trace emissions that shouldn't exist. Following the trail deeper into the field, she found something that made her question her own sanity. Hidden within a hollowed-out asteroid was a facility that looked like it had been built by someone with unlimited resources and impossible technical knowledge. The docking bay accepted her ship automatically, and artificial gravity kicked in as soon as she stepped out of her cockpit. The place was clearly inhabited but empty at the moment. She walked through corridors lined with technology that belonged in science fiction novels, past workshops where half-finished inventions lay scattered on workbenches. Everything had a distinctly human feel to it, but human technology decades or centuries ahead of anything Zelthara possessed. In what appeared to be the main living area, she found walls covered with photographs. Pictures of Zelthara, of her people, of the various threats that had been defeated over the years. But, in the center of it all was an old, faded photograph that stopped her heart. It was a picture from her 13th birthday party, taken 25 years ago in her family's backyard in New Harbor. She was laughing at something while a skinny boy with serious eyes smiled beside her, holding a toy spacecraft he'd made from scrap metal. The boy was wearing a jacket with T-Chin embroidered on the pocket. "Hello, Lyra." She spun around, and her world changed forever. Standing in the doorway was a man in his early 30s, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't hide the quiet strength in his posture. He'd grown up, filled out, and gained the kind of confidence that came from facing impossible odds and winning. But his eyes were the same serious, thoughtful eyes she remembered from childhood. "Tommy?" The name came out as barely a whisper. He smiled, and for a moment she saw the boy she'd known, the one who'd promised to build ships that could protect everyone he cared about. "I go by Thomas now. Though most people in this part of space know me by other names. The Shadow Protector." The guardian who had saved her world again and again. Her childhood friend who was supposed to be dead. How, was all she managed to say. It's a long story, Thomas said, gesturing to a comfortable seating area. And, we don't have much time. The Void Reapers will be here soon, and, this time I'm going to need help. As he began to explain, Lyra realized that everything she thought she knew about heroes, about loss, and about the boy who'd dreamed impossible dreams was about to change. The greatest mystery of her adult life was sitting across from her, offering tea with the same gentle mannerisms she remembered from when they were kids. Outside the asteroid, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unaware that in this small hidden place, two friends separated by decades and deception were about to discover that some bonds are stronger than death, and some promises are kept even when the world believes you're gone. The Shadow Protector had a name, a face, and a history. More importantly, he had a plan that would require everything she'd learned as a soldier and everything she remembered about trust between friends who'd promised to always watch out for each other. The real story was just beginning. The tea was still the same kind Tommy had always preferred, a mild herbal blend that somehow tasted exactly like childhood memories. Lyra sat across from her supposedly dead best friend in a hidden asteroid base that shouldn't exist, trying to process the impossible reality that the mysterious Shadow Protector was the same boy who used to help her build blanket forts and explain the theoretical physics of faster-than-light travel. The transport accident wasn't an accident, Thomas said quietly, his hands wrapped around his own cup. My father discovered something in his research that certain parties didn't want made public. When he tried to publish his findings about dimensional phase technology, people who preferred that technology remain classified decided to silence him permanently. Lyra set down her tea with shaking hands. The whole family was reported dead. There was wreckage, DNA evidence. All fabricated. We were taken to a black site research facility run by a consortium of corporations and military contractors. They wanted my father's work, and they thought keeping us prisoner would ensure his cooperation. Thomas's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there when they were children. They were wrong about how far he'd go to protect us. Standing up, Thomas led her to a wall display that activated at his touch. Images flowed across the surface showing technical schematics, test footage, and what looked like a timeline spanning decades. Dad refused to work for them, so they tried a different approach. They told him they'd let Mom and me go if he completed just one prototype. A ship that could phase through solid matter. The display showed a young Thomas, maybe 16, working alongside his father in what looked like a high-tech laboratory. Both wore prisoner clothing, but their focus on the work was intense and collaborative. Of course, they were lying. Once the prototype was finished, they planned to eliminate all of us and claim the technology as their own development. What happened? Lyra asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew. Dad built them their ship. But he also built something they didn't expect. The display shifted to show technical blueprints that made Lyra's head spin. He embedded himself and me into the ship's AI system through an experimental consciousness transfer process. When they tried to kill us, we weren't entirely biological anymore. Thomas touched another control, and a section of the wall slid away to reveal a view of the main hangar. The ship floating there was beautiful in its impossibility, sleek curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal while somehow maintaining perfect structural integrity. Mom died in the escape, but Dad and I made it out. The process that saved us left him permanently linked to the ship's systems. He spent the next 10 years teaching me everything he knew about the technology and about the responsibility that came with it. The weight of what he was telling her settled over Lyra like a heavy blanket. He's gone now? 5 years ago. A cascade failure in the consciousness transfer matrix. His last words were a reminder of something he'd been telling me since we escaped. Thomas turned back to her, and she saw depths of loss and determination in his eyes that broke her heart. He said we had the power to protect people, so we had the responsibility to use it wisely. And you chose to protect Zelthara. I chose to protect you, he corrected gently. When I learned you joined the Defense Force, when I saw the kinds of threats your world was facing, the choice was obvious. I couldn't reach out directly because there are still people looking for me, for this technology. But I could make sure you were safe. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. All those times the Shadow Protector had appeared, all those impossible victories, they hadn't been about politics or strategy or even heroism in the grand sense. They'd been about a friend keeping a promise she didn't even know he'd made. Tommy, She started, then stopped. What could she possibly say to that? I know it's a lot to process, he said, settling back down across from her. And I know it changes things between us. I've been the mysterious guardian for so long, I almost forgot what it was like to just be myself around someone who knew me before all of this. Looking around the base, Lyra began to understand the magnitude of what her friend had built. This wasn't just a hideout or a workshop. It was a one-man operation dedicated to protecting an entire world, maintained by someone who could have used his incredible technology for anything but chose to spend his life as a guardian angel for people he'd never meet. The Void Reapers, she said, forcing herself to focus on the immediate crisis. You said you need help this time. Thomas nodded, his expression growing serious. They're different from the other threats we've faced. The court hacks, the pirates, even the AI collectives, they were conventional forces that could be defeated through conventional means, just applied unconventionally. The Void Reapers are something else entirely. He called up new displays showing intelligence gathered on the approaching fleet. Thousands of ships arranged in harvesting patterns, each one equipped with technology designed to break down matter at the atomic level. They don't invade planets, they consume them. Everything gets converted into raw materials for their fleet's expansion. By the time they're done with the system, there's nothing left but empty space and trace elements. And one ship, no matter how advanced, can't stop something like that? One ship operated by one person can't stop them, Thomas corrected. But the technology exists to save Zelthara. I just need a partner who understands both military tactics and advanced physics. Someone I trust completely. The implications of what he was suggesting slowly dawned on her. You want me to help you pilot that thing? I want you to be my co-pilot, my tactical officer, and my friend, Thomas said simply. The ship's systems can support 2 consciousness transfers temporarily. Not the permanent kind that Dad and I underwent, but enough to give you access to the ship's capabilities during the battle. Lyra stared at him, then at the impossible vessel floating in the hangar. What about my people? My command responsibilities? Your fleet will be essential to the plan. We can't save everyone by running and hiding. The Void Reapers will just follow the evacuation ships and harvest them one by one. The only way to win is to destroy their entire fleet before they can adapt to our tactics. Standing up, Thomas led her to the hangar where his ship waited. Up close, it was even more impressive. The hull seemed to shimmer with inner light, and Lyra could feel energy radiating from it even from several meters away. What's it called? She asked. Promise Keeper, Thomas said with a slight smile. Dad named it. He said every ship should have a name that reminds its pilot why they fly. The next few hours were a crash course in technology that belonged in dreams. Thomas showed her the phase drive that allowed the ship to pass through solid matter, the quantum disruptor arrays that could shut down enemy systems without destroying them, and the consciousness interface that would allow her to think at computer speeds while maintaining human intuition. The process is temporary but intense, he warned as he showed her the interface chamber. You'll be aware of every system on the ship, every calculation it makes, every threat in a light-year radius. Some people find it overwhelming. Some people don't have childhood friends who explain theoretical physics to them every day after school, Lyra replied. I think I can handle it. As evening approached, Thomas shared more of his story. The years of hiding, the careful observation of threats to Zelthara, the loneliness of being the mysterious guardian that no one could know or thank. He'd built a life around protecting others while denying himself any real connection to the people he saved. Weren't you tempted to reach out sooner? Lyra asked as they shared dinner in the base's small kitchen. Even just to let me know you were alive? Every day, Thomas admitted. But the people hunting me have resources across multiple sectors. If they'd discovered our connection, you would have become a target. I couldn't risk that. And now? Now the Void Reapers are coming, and conventional tactics won't be enough. I need someone I trust, someone who knows me well enough to anticipate my thinking in the middle of a battle. He met her eyes across the table. Besides, after tomorrow, either we'll have saved Zelthara or we'll both be dead. Either way, the secret won't matter anymore. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She stood at the observation deck Thomas had shown her, looking out at the stars and trying to reconcile the boy she'd known with the man he'd become. The changes were obvious. He was stronger, more confident, carrying the weight of responsibilities she couldn't imagine. But, underneath it all, he was still Tommy Chen, the kid who'd promised to build ships that could protect everyone he cared about. He'd kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined when they were children. In the morning, they would link their minds to an impossible ship and face an enemy that consumed worlds. They would either save Zelthara or die trying. But, tonight, for the first time in decades, neither of them was alone. Thomas found her there eventually, bringing 2 cups of hot chocolate like they used to share during sleepovers when they were kids. They stood side by side, looking out at the approaching storm of ships that would arrive in 18 hours. "Are you scared?" Lyra asked. Terrified, Thomas admitted. "Not of dying, exactly. But, of failing. Of not being enough to save everyone who's counting on me." "You're not alone this time," she reminded him. "No," he agreed, and, for the first time since she'd arrived, he smiled without shadows behind it. "I'm not." Outside, the Void Reaper fleet continued its approach, unaware that the small world they planned to harvest was protected by friendship stronger than death and technology born from love and loss. The real battle would begin soon, but, in this moment, 2 old friends stood together against the darkness, ready to prove that some promises are worth keeping, no matter what the cost. The consciousness transfer chamber felt like stepping into a dream made solid. Crystalline walls pulsed with gentle light while neural interface cables hung from the ceiling like luminous vines. Lyra stood at the threshold, wearing the bioadaptive suit Thomas had given her, trying to quiet the voice in her head that kept insisting this was impossible. "The connection will feel strange at first," Thomas said, checking the chamber's systems one final time. "You'll suddenly be aware of things your brain was never designed to process. Quantum fluctuations, gravitational distortions, electromagnetic fields across the spectrum. The ship's AI will filter most of it, but there's still an adjustment period." Through the chamber's transparent aluminum viewing port, Lyra could see the Promise Keeper's main systems coming online. The ship's hull began to glow with that characteristic shimmer she'd seen from a distance so many times before. Now she understood it wasn't just advanced technology at work, but a vessel designed to be piloted by consciousness itself rather than merely hands and conventional controls. "What if my mind can't handle it?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since they'd begun preparations. Thomas paused in his calibrations and looked at her seriously. "Lyra, when we were kids, you were the only person who could follow my explanations of quantum mechanics while helping me debug my theoretical equations. Your mind has always been capable of more than you give it credit for." She remembered those afternoons, sitting in his family's garage while he sketched impossible designs and tried to explain concepts that shouldn't have made sense to 13-year-olds. Somehow, though, they had made sense. Tommy had a gift for teaching, and she'd had a gift for understanding things that seemed incomprehensible to everyone else. Besides, Thomas added with a grin that reminded her exactly why she trusted him with her childhood secrets: "The AI won't let anything happen to you. Dad built safeguards into every system. If your neural patterns show any sign of stress, the connection automatically reduces to safe levels." The Void Reaper fleet would drop out of hyperspace in 4 hours. Thomas had spent the morning coordinating with Admiral Kane and the Defense Force commanders, sharing intelligence and tactical suggestions while carefully avoiding any details about the Promise Keeper's true capabilities. As far as the official record showed, an anonymous ally had provided strategic analysis and would assist in the battle. Lyra stepped into the chamber and felt the bioadaptive suit begin interfacing with the ship's systems. Microscopic connectors found neural pathways through her skin, establishing connections that felt like tiny electric whispers across her nervous system. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant, like discovering she had new senses she'd never known existed. Beginning consciousness transfer in 3, 2, 1. The universe exploded into awareness. Suddenly, Lyra wasn't just herself anymore. She was the ship, feeling the gentle tug of Zelthara's gravity well, sensing the electromagnetic signatures of every vessel in the system, aware of quantum fluctuations that painted impossible colors across dimensions she couldn't name. The experience should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt natural, like finally being able to see after a lifetime of blindness. Thomas's presence joined hers in the ship's consciousness matrix, familiar and comforting even in this bizarre new form of existence. His mind felt like coming home, with the same combination of brilliant analytical thinking and gentle compassion she remembered from childhood, now enhanced by decades of experience with technology beyond imagination. "How do you feel?" His voice reached her through both the communication system and direct neural link. "Like I'm flying without wings," Lyra replied, marveling at the sensation of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "This is incredible, Tommy. I can sense everything. Wait until you see what we can do together." The Promise Keeper lifted off from the asteroid base with grace that defied physics. From her new perspective, Lyra understood that the ship didn't really move through space so much as negotiate with spacetime itself, convincing the universe to relocate them wherever they needed to be. The phase drive wasn't just advanced propulsion, it was applied philosophy, treating reality as something that could be gently reasoned with rather than fought against. They approached the outer system where the Defense Force fleet waited in formation. Admiral Kane had deployed every available ship in a defensive grid around Zelthara, but, even enhanced by Thomas's tactical suggestions, it was barely a fraction of what would be needed against the Void Reaper's overwhelming numbers. "Promise Keeper to Zelthara Command," Thomas broadcast on standard frequencies, using voice modulation to maintain his anonymous status. "We're in position and ready to coordinate." "Acknowledged, Promise Keeper," Admiral Kane's voice crackled back. "Sensors show hyperspace disruption beginning. Enemy fleet drop in estimated 20 minutes. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, Lyra could detect the approaching ripples in spacetime that preceded a fleet translation from hyperspace. The readings made her consciousness recoil in shock. "Tommy, there are so many of them. The sensor estimates weren't even close." "I know. But, remember what we discussed. Numbers don't matter if we can disrupt their coordination." Thomas's mental presence radiated calm confidence, but she could sense the underlying tension. The Void Reapers fight as a collective consciousness, like a single organism spread across thousands of ships. If we can sever those connections, the fleet becomes just a bunch of individual ships with no strategic coordination, Lyra finished. "But how do we do that without being overwhelmed in the first few minutes?" "By being faster, smarter, and more unpredictable than they expect. And by using the one advantage we have that they don't know about. Which is, we're human." The first Void Reaper ships began dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge, and Lyra's enhanced awareness immediately understood why they were so feared. These weren't vessels in the conventional sense. They were living things, grown rather than built, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and weapons targeting systems. The ships moved with predatory grace, already beginning to form the harvesting patterns that would systematically strip Zelthara down to its component atoms. "My God," Admiral Kane's voice came over the calm, tight with barely controlled fear. "How many are there?" "Current count shows approximately 12,000 vessels of various classes," Thomas replied with professional calm that belied the tension Lyra could feel in his mental presence. "Recommendation: maintain defensive formation until we can assess their tactical approach." More ships kept arriving, filling space around Zelthara with a cloud of organic death that moved with terrifying coordination. Each vessel's bioluminescent displays pulsed in perfect synchronization with thousands of others, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly even through the Promise Keeper's filtered sensors. "They're not just communicating," Lyra realized. "The light patterns are some kind of shared consciousness network. Each ship is like a neuron in a massive brain." "Exactly. Dad and I encountered them once before, in the Kepler sector. Watched them consume 3 inhabited worlds before we figured out how their collective intelligence worked." Thomas began adjusting the ship's systems, preparing for what Lyra sensed would be an incredibly dangerous plan. "The good news is that their strength is also their weakness." "How so?" "Individual Void Reaper ships are actually quite fragile. They rely entirely on the collective for strategic thinking and tactical coordination. Isolate one from the network, and it becomes almost helpless. The problem is getting close enough to disrupt their connections without being destroyed by the other 11,999 ships protecting it." Through the ship's sensors, Lyra watched the Void Reaper fleet complete its arrival and begin forming attack formations. The sight was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, thousands of living ships moving in perfect harmony, their bioluminescent displays creating light shows that painted the darkness of space in colors that didn't exist in nature. Promise Keeper, this is Admiral Kane. Enemy fleet is beginning approach vector. What are your intentions? Thomas hesitated for just a moment, and Lyra could feel him making a decision that would change everything. Zelphira command, we're going to try something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Maintain defensive positions but be ready to capitalize on any openings we create. Understood. Good hunting, Promise Keeper. The communication ended, leaving Lyra alone with Thomas in the ship's consciousness matrix, facing an enemy that outnumbered them thousands to one. But, as the Promise Keeper began to move, she felt something she hadn't expected, excitement rather than fear. What's the plan? She asked. We're going to teach the Void Reapers why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, Thomas replied, his mental presence radiating the kind of fierce joy that came from having impossible odds and a really good idea. We're going to show them that sometimes, two minds working together can outthink a collective consciousness that's spread too thin. The Promise Keeper accelerated toward the enemy fleet, phasing in and out of normal space to avoid the initial wave of bioplasma fire. Through their shared consciousness, Lyra felt Thomas begin implementing a plan so audacious it took her breath away. They weren't going to fight 12,000 ships. They were going to convince 12,000 ships to fight each other. Hold on, Thomas warned as they dove into the heart of the Void Reaper formation. This is going to get interesting. Lyra's last coherent thought before the battle truly began was that interesting was definitely one word for what they were about to attempt. Completely insane might be more accurate, but she'd trusted Tommy Chen with her life before, and she was prepared to do it again on a scale that would either save her world or destroy them both in the most spectacular way possible. The Promise Keeper dove through the Void Reaper formation like a ghost made of light and impossible physics. Lyra's consciousness rode the ship's quantum awareness as they phased between dimensions, existing just long enough in normal space to deploy the first stage of Thomas's plan before disappearing again into the spaces between reality. Through their shared mental link, she felt Thomas accessing memories from his encounter with the Void Reapers in the Kepler sector. The images that flowed between them were horrific, 3 worlds stripped down to nothing while their populations screamed for help that never came. But, buried in those memories was also understanding, knowledge of how the collective consciousness network functioned and, more importantly, how it could be disrupted. The network depends on synchronized bioluminescent communication, Thomas explained as they avoided a concentrated blast of plasma fire from a cluster of Reaper ships. Each ship broadcasts its local tactical data to the collective, which processes everything and sends back coordinated instructions. It's incredibly efficient, but it has one critical vulnerability. Information overload, Lyra realized, following his reasoning through their neural link. If you flood the network with too much contradictory data, the collective intelligence crashes trying to process conflicting information from too many sources. Individual ships default to basic survival protocols and start treating everything as a threat, including each other. The Promise Keeper emerged from phase space directly inside the enemy formation's core, surrounded by massive Reaper vessels that immediately began targeting them with bioplasma weapons. But, instead of fleeing, Thomas activated systems that Lyra hadn't even known the ship possessed. Quantum resonance projectors unfolded from the Promise Keeper's hull like metallic flowers blooming in space. Each projector began broadcasting complex light patterns that mimicked the Void Reaper's own communication protocols, but with subtle modifications that introduced chaos into their coordinated signals. We're mimicking their communication system? Lyra asked, watching the projectors work while simultaneously helping Thomas pilot through the increasingly dense weapons fire. Better than that. We're becoming part of their network temporarily. Every Reaper ship in communications range thinks we're one of them, broadcasting tactical data. Except our data is carefully crafted to be logically contradictory to what the other ships are reporting. The effect was almost immediate. Lyra watched through the ship's sensors as the perfect coordination of the Void Reaper fleet began to develop stutters and inconsistencies. Ships that had been moving in flawless formation started making micro-adjustments that put them slightly out of sync with their neighbors. But they weren't done. Phase shifting to a new position deeper in the enemy formation, Thomas activated the second part of his plan. The Promise Keeper began broadcasting false sensor readings that showed massive Defense Force reinforcements arriving from multiple vectors, reinforcements that didn't actually exist. The beauty of a collective intelligence is that it trusts its own sensors implicitly, Thomas explained as they dodged another wave of plasma fire. If one ship reports massive enemy forces approaching from the galactic east, and another reports the same forces approaching from galactic west, the collective tries to reconcile both reports as equally valid. Through their neural link, Lyra felt Thomas's satisfaction as the Void Reaper fleet began responding to threats that existed only in their shared consciousness. Ships started repositioning to face phantom enemies, breaking their careful formation patterns and creating gaps in their defensive coordination. The third phase of the plan was where things got dangerous. "We need to get to their command ship," Thomas said, highlighting a massive vessel at the center of the formation that pulsed with brighter bioluminescence than the others. "That's where the collective intelligence is actually housed. If we can introduce our viral data patterns directly into their core processing matrix, the entire fleet will lose coordination simultaneously," Lyra finished. "But, Tommy, that ship is protected by at least 1,000 others. How do we get close enough?" "Very carefully. And very fast." The Promise Keeper began what could only be described as the most dangerous flying Lyra had ever experienced. They phase-shifted in and out of normal space at microsecond intervals, appearing just long enough to change vector before disappearing again. The effect made them nearly impossible to target, but the strain on both the ship's systems and their shared consciousness was enormous. Through her enhanced awareness, Lyra monitored the Promise Keeper's quantum stability while Thomas handled navigation and combat systems. She could feel the ship's reality anchors beginning to strain under the rapid phase transitions. Much more of this, and they risked becoming permanently displaced from normal space. "Warning, quantum coherence at 60%, the ship's AI announced in a voice that sounded remarkably like Thomas's father. "Recommend reducing phase transition frequency." "Not an option," Thomas replied grimly. "We need to reach the command ship before the collective adapts to our interference patterns." Around them, the Void Reaper fleet was beginning to show serious signs of dysfunction. Individual ships started firing on each other as the contradictory sensor data convinced different parts of the collective that there were enemy infiltrators throughout the formation. The beautiful, synchronized light patterns that had marked their arrival were becoming chaotic strobes as the network tried to process increasingly contradictory information. Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the communications system. "Promise Keeper, we're seeing massive disruption in the enemy formation. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Our defensive grid is holding, and some of the Reaper ships are actually retreating from their attack positions." But Lyra could see what the Admiral couldn't. The collective intelligence was fighting back, trying to isolate and eliminate the source of the viral data patterns. Counter-algorithms were beginning to appear in the network, attempting to trace the false information back to its source. "They're adapting," she warned Thomas. "The collective is starting to filter out our false signals." "I know. Which means we have maybe 5 minutes before they locate us and coordinate a response that no amount of phase shifting will save us from." The Promise Keeper made a final sprint toward the command ship, pushing the quantum drives to their absolute limits. Reality blurred around them as they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their consciousness stretched across probability matrices that human minds were never designed to comprehend. They reached the command vessel's outer perimeter with quantum coherence at 30% and warning alarms screaming through their shared awareness. The command ship itself was a massive organic structure that pulsed with the concentrated intelligence of the entire fleet. Approaching it was like flying toward a living star that thought with the power of 10,000 minds. "Thomas, this is insane. We can't survive getting that close to their central consciousness." "Yes, we can. But not as separate individuals." Thomas's mental presence reached out to hers through their neural link, offering complete mental fusion. "If we combine our consciousness patterns completely, we can create a cognitive firewall that will let us interface with their network directly." Total mental fusion. The idea should have terrified her, but instead Lyra felt a sense of completion, like she was finally understanding a truth that had been waiting her entire life to be recognized. She and Tommy had always thought better together than apart. Now they could literally become a single consciousness capable of taking on a collective intelligence comprised of thousands. "Do it," she said. Their minds merged completely, individual thoughts and memories flowing together until Lyra couldn't tell where her consciousness ended and Thomas's began. The fusion created something new, not Lyra or Thomas, but a hybrid intelligence that combined her tactical intuition with his technical knowledge, her emotional strength with his analytical precision. The Promise Keeper crashed through the command ship's bioelectric defenses like a quantum battering ram, carrying its merged pilots directly into the heart of the Void Reaper collective consciousness. What they found there was beautiful and terrible, a vast network of interconnected minds that had achieved perfect cooperation by sacrificing individual identity. Every thought was shared, every decision was consensus, every action was coordinated across thousands of vessels. It was the ultimate evolution of collective intelligence, and it was completely unprepared for the chaotic creativity of human consciousness. The merged Lyra-Thomas entity began introducing randomness into the perfect system. Not the careful viral patterns they'd been broadcasting, but pure human creativity, jokes, memories, emotional responses, intuitive leaps that made no logical sense but somehow led to breakthrough insights. They flooded the network with everything that made human consciousness unique: contradiction, uncertainty, hope, fear, love, and the stubborn refusal to accept that impossible things couldn't be achieved through pure determination. The Void Reaper collective intelligence tried to process this flood of irrational data and crashed spectacularly. Across the fleet, ships began shutting down as their individual crews reverted to primitive survival instincts without the guidance of their shared consciousness. Some fled, some fought each other, and some simply drifted in space as their pilots struggled to remember how to function as individuals rather than parts of a collective. The Promise Keeper barely escaped the collapsing command ship, its quantum drives failing just as they cleared the explosion radius. As the ship automatically separated their merged consciousness back into individual minds, Lyra found herself gasping in the interface chamber, overwhelmed by the sudden return to single-person awareness. Through the viewports, she could see the Void Reaper fleet in complete disarray. Thousands of ships that had arrived as a perfect collective intelligence were now scattered across space, leaderless and confused. The few that retained any coordination were already fleeing toward the system's edge, apparently deciding that whatever had just happened to them wasn't worth risking a second encounter. "Zelphara, command to Promise Keeper," Admiral Kane's voice was filled with amazement and relief. "Enemy fleet is in full retreat. Sensors show massive system failures across their formation. I don't know how you did it, but you've just saved our entire world." As the Promise Keeper limped back toward the asteroid base, its quantum drive severely damaged by the impossible stresses they'd endured, Lyra realized that she and Thomas had accomplished something that would be talked about for generations. They hadn't just defeated an enemy fleet, they'd proven that human consciousness, with all its flaws and contradictions, was ultimately more adaptable than any perfect collective intelligence. But, more importantly, they'd done it together. The boy who'd promised to build ships that could protect everyone he cared about had kept that promise, and she'd been there to help him when it mattered most. 3 weeks after the battle that saved Zelphara, Lyra stood in the observation lounge of Defense Force headquarters, watching the reconstruction efforts in orbit. The Void Reaper's retreat had left behind debris fields that would take months to clear, but it had also provided an unexpected gift: advanced biotechnological samples that Zelphara's scientists were already studying with fascination. The official reports credited the victory to unprecedented tactical coordination with Allied forces, but Lyra knew the truth was far more complex. Thomas had returned to his hidden base immediately after the battle, claiming that his ship needed extensive repairs that could only be performed with specialized equipment. The Promise Keeper's quantum drives had been damaged beyond conventional repair, requiring technology that existed nowhere else in the sector. But he'd also given her something before disappearing again: a communicator that would let her contact him directly, ending decades of one-way protection. "Captain Voss?" Admiral Kane's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find him approaching with a woman she didn't recognize, tall, elegant, with the kind of bearing that suggested high-level government connections. "Admiral, how can I help you?" "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Chen," Kane said. "She's here representing the Consortium for Advanced Research. She has some questions about the battle with the Void Reapers." Lyra's blood ran cold. Chun. The name could be a coincidence, but something in the woman's eyes suggested otherwise. What kind of questions? The kind that concern advanced technology that shouldn't exist, Dr. Chen replied smoothly. My organization has been tracking certain developments that originated from classified research projects. Research that was supposedly destroyed decades ago. This was exactly what Thomas had been afraid of. The people who'd killed his family and stolen his father's work were still out there, still hunting for the technology that had saved Zelthera. And now they'd found traces of it in the wreckage from the battle. I'm not sure what you mean, Lyra said carefully. Of course not. But perhaps you could help us understand how a single unknown vessel managed to defeat an entire Void Reaper fleet? Our analysis of the battle recordings shows quantum resonance patterns that match theoretical designs from a project that was terminated 25 years ago. Dr. Chen stepped closer, and Lyra could see the calculated intelligence behind her polite expression. We're particularly interested in making contact with the pilot of that vessel. My organization would very much like to discuss certain technological innovations with them. Admiral Kane looked confused by the conversation, clearly not understanding the undercurrents of threat and recognition flowing between the two women. Dr. Chen, I'm afraid Captain Voss has already provided complete debriefings on the battle. If you need additional technical analysis. What I need, Dr. Chen said without taking her eyes off Lyra, is to understand how technology that should have died with Dr. Marcus Chen and his family ended up saving this world. The mask was off now. This woman knew exactly who had been piloting the Promise Keeper, and she was here to finish what her organization had started decades ago. I think you should leave, Lyra said quietly. I think you should consider the consequences of harboring a wanted fugitive, Dr. Chen replied. My organization has legal authority across 12 sectors. If we have to declare Thomas Chen a threat to galactic security, then you'll have to go through me first. The voice came from behind them. Lyra spun around to see Thomas walking into the observation lounge, no longer trying to hide his identity. He wore civilian clothes, but there was something in his posture that suggested he was far from helpless. Dr. Chen's composure cracked slightly. Thomas. You've been very difficult to find. Not difficult enough, apparently. Thomas moved to stand beside Lyra, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Hello, Sarah. Still working for the people who murdered my family? The people who gave you the opportunity to transcend normal human limitations, Dr. Chen corrected. Do you have any idea what you could accomplish if you stopped playing hero and started thinking about the greater good? I have a pretty good idea what your organization considers the greater good, Thomas replied. Weapons that can phase through any defense. Ships that can disable entire fleets without firing a shot. Technology that could make whoever controls it the dominant force in the galaxy. Exactly. And it's wasted on protecting one small world when it could be reshaping the entire political structure of known space. Admiral Kane was looking increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation revealed layers of conspiracy and threat he hadn't been prepared for. Captain Voss, perhaps we should. No, Lyra said firmly. Admiral, I think you need to hear this. Dr. Chen's organization murdered an entire family to steal research that could have benefited everyone. They've spent decades hunting the survivors, and now they want to steal that technology again. That's a very dramatic interpretation of legitimate corporate research recovery, Dr. Chen said smoothly. But it doesn't matter what stories you tell. I have a recovery team waiting in orbit. Thomas can come with me voluntarily, or we can take him by force. Either way, he's coming with me. Thomas smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the boy who used to explain impossible physics while building toy spacecraft. Sarah, you're making the same mistake your organization always makes. You think technology is more important than the people who create it. What do you mean? I mean you've been chasing the wrong thing for 25 years. You want my father's consciousness transfer technology, but you've never understood how it actually works. It's not just about the machinery or the quantum algorithms. It's about the human element, the relationships and emotions and commitments that make the technology possible in the first place. Dr. Chen looked confused, and Lyra realized that Thomas was leading up to something. She could see it in his expression, the same look he'd had as a child when he was about to reveal the solution to a problem everyone else thought was impossible. The Promise Keeper isn't just a ship, Thomas continued. It's a partnership between human consciousness and quantum technology. And that partnership can't be stolen or forced or duplicated by people who don't understand what makes it work. What are you talking about? Thomas pulled out a small device that Lyra recognized as a quantum communicator. I'm talking about the fact that every modification I've made to my father's original designs has been shared with a network of people who understand that technology should serve humanity, not control it. He activated the device, and the observation lounge's main display screen lit up with incoming transmissions. Dozens of them, from coordinates scattered across the galaxy. Each transmission showed a different person in a different location, all wearing the same expression of quiet determination. Meet the Chen Foundation, Thomas said. Former prisoners, refugees, scientists who believed in my father's vision of technology as liberation rather than oppression. They've been building ships, training pilots, and preparing for the day when organizations like yours finally found me. Dr. Chen stared at the display in shock. That's impossible. The technology requires direct neural interface with the original consciousness matrix. It can't be replicated. You're right. It can't be replicated. But it can be shared. Thomas gestured to Lyra. The consciousness link that allowed us to defeat the Void Reapers created a quantum entanglement pattern that can be transmitted to other compatible minds. Every person on those screens has been through the same process. The implications hit Dr. Chen like a physical blow. Instead of hunting one man with stolen technology, her organization was now facing a network of enhanced individuals scattered across known space, all of them beyond conventional tracking or capture. This is why your approach was always doomed to fail, Thomas continued. You thought you could control technology by controlling the people who created it. But you can't steal human consciousness, and you can't force loyalty from people you've terrorized. Admiral Kane was staring at the display with growing understanding. These people, they're all like you? They all have access to phase technology? They're all committed to the same principles, Thomas corrected. Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Stopping organizations that use technology for oppression rather than liberation. Making sure that the galaxy's most advanced technology serves the greater good rather than the greatest power. Dr. Chen's composure finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you've done. The consortium won't just disappear because you've complicated the situation. They'll escalate. They'll declare your entire network a terrorist organization. Let them try, Lyra said, understanding finally falling into place. They'll be fighting an enemy they can't track, can't predict, and can't defeat through conventional means. Thomas nodded. The Chen Foundation isn't about conquest or control. It's about making sure that technology like the Promise Keeper is used to help people rather than hurt them. We're not trying to rule the galaxy. We're just trying to keep it free. Over the next hour, Thomas explained the full scope of what he and his father's legacy had become. The network included former Void Reaper prisoners who'd been freed from collective consciousness, scientists who'd escaped corporate-sponsored research facilities, and ordinary people who'd been given the chance to become something extraordinary in service of protecting others. Dr. Chen left eventually, after Thomas made it clear that any attempt to capture him would result in the immediate activation of defensive protocols that she really didn't want to experience firsthand. Her organization would undoubtedly continue hunting for the Chen Foundation, but they would be chasing shadows scattered across the galaxy. That evening, Lyra and Thomas sat on the observation deck of his asteroid base, sharing tea and watching the stars wheel overhead. The Promise Keeper floated in the hangar below them, fully repaired and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. So what happens now? Lyra asked. You can't go back to being the mysterious shadow protector. Too many people know who you are. No, but I can do something better, Thomas replied. I can be part of something larger than just protecting one world. The Foundation needs coordinators, people who understand both military tactics and advanced technology. Are you asking me to join your network of quantum-enhanced heroes? I'm asking my best friend if she wants to help make sure that technology serves the right purposes, Thomas corrected. The consciousness transfer process is voluntary and reversible. You'd have access to enhanced capabilities, but you'd still be yourself. Lyra considered the offer, thinking about everything she'd seen and experienced over the past weeks. The boy she'd known had grown up to become something extraordinary, but he'd never lost the fundamental decency that had made him special in the first place. If the galaxy was going to be shaped by advanced technology, she wanted it to be guided by people like him. One question, she said. Will I still get to fly impossible ships and confuse enemy fleets with creative tactical thinking? Thomas grinned. Lyra, after what we did to the Void Reapers, I'm pretty sure confusing enemy fleets with creative tactical thinking is going to be our specialty. In that case, count me in. As they shook hands on the agreement, Lyra realized that the childhood friendship she'd thought was lost forever had instead evolved into something she'd never imagined possible. They'd grown up, faced impossible odds, and discovered that some bonds are strong enough to reshape the galaxy. The Chun Foundation would face challenges from organizations that wanted to control their technology, from enemies that wanted to destroy them, and from the simple difficulties of coordinating enhanced individuals across vast distances. But they would face those challenges together, guided by principles that valued freedom over power and protection over conquest. Outside the observation deck, stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that in this small hidden place, two friends had just committed to a future where technology served the dreams of children rather than the ambitions of corporations. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when human creativity and quantum technology worked together in service of something greater than themselves. The Shadow Protector was gone, but Thomas Chen and the Foundation built on his father's legacy were just beginning. And they would not be protecting just one world anymore, but fighting to ensure that every world had the chance to dream of impossible things and see those dreams become reality. Some promises, once made between true friends, echo across the galaxy itself.